Sarah Martinez had been staring at the same job rejection email for 20 minutes. The cursor blinked mockingly on her laptop screen as rain drummed against the windows of her small Portland apartment. At 32, she felt like life was passing her by while she remained stuck in neutral. Her teaching degree hung uselessly on the wall, and her savings account was dwindling faster than her patience. The phone buzzed. Her sister Emma's name appeared on the screen. "Hey, still moping about that school district job?" Emma's voice carried its usual mix of love and exasperation. "I wasn't moping," Sarah lied, closing the laptop. "I was strategically planning my next move." "Right, listen, I have something that might interest you. Remember my college roommate Jessica? She works for a nonprofit now, something called Healing Hearts Educational Outreach. They're looking for someone to spend 6 months on the Modoc reservation in Northern California, setting up after-school programs for kids." Sarah's first instinct was to say no. She'd grown up in comfortable suburban neighborhoods, attended private schools, and had never spent significant time on a reservation. The idea felt overwhelming and slightly terrifying. "I don't know, Em. I'm not exactly qualified for that kind of work. You have a teaching degree and you're great with kids. Plus, they provide housing and a decent stipend. It could be exactly what you need right now." Sarah walked to her window, watching people hurry past with umbrellas and purpose. Everyone seemed to know where they were going except her. Maybe Emma was right. Maybe she needed something completely different, something that would shake her out of this endless cycle of applications and rejections. What exactly would I be doing? Working with kids aged 6 to 16, organizing educational activities, maybe some tutoring. The reservation has limited resources, and they're looking for someone who can think creatively and work independently. That evening, Sarah found herself researching the Modoc tribe online. She learned about their history, their struggles with poverty and limited educational opportunities, and their deep connection to the land around Alturas, California. The more she read, the more intrigued she became. This could be her chance to do something meaningful, something that mattered. 3 weeks later, she was loading her Honda Civic with everything she owned that could fit. Her parents had been supportive but worried. Her friends thought she was crazy, and Sarah herself wasn't entirely sure what she was getting into. But for the first time in months, she felt excited about the future. The drive to Northern California took her through landscapes she'd never seen before. As she left the familiar highways behind and entered the high desert country, something inside her began to shift. The vastness of the sky, the rolling hills dotted with sagebrush, the sense of space and possibility, it all felt like a deep breath after months of holding her breath. The reservation was smaller than she'd expected, and more beautiful. Houses dotted the landscape, some well-maintained, others showing signs of economic struggle. Children played in yards, their laughter carrying on the wind. Mountains rose in the distance, purple and mysterious against the late afternoon sky. Jessica met her at the tribal offices, a warm woman in her 30s with kind eyes and a firm handshake. "Sarah, I'm so glad you decided to come. We really need someone with your enthusiasm and education background. I hope I can live up to your expectations," Sarah said, feeling suddenly nervous. "You will. The kids here are amazing, smart, funny, resilient. They just need someone who believes in them and can show them new possibilities." Jessica drove her to a small but comfortable mobile home that would be hers for the next 6 months. It was simple but clean, with a tiny kitchen, a living area, and a bedroom. Through the window, she could see children playing basketball on a court behind the community center. "The after-school program meets in the community center," Jessica explained. "We usually have between 15 and 20 kids show up depending on the day. Some come every day, others just when they feel like it. Part of your job is making it feel welcoming enough that they want to keep coming back." That first night, Sarah sat on her small porch as the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink she'd never seen in the city. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant sound of dogs barking and the wind moving through the sagebrush. She thought about her life in Portland, the endless job applications, the feeling of going through motions without purpose. Here, surrounded by this vast landscape and faced with the challenge of connecting with children from a culture so different from her own, she felt more awake than she had in years. The next morning, she walked to the community center to meet the kids. Her stomach churned with nerves. What if they didn't like her? What if she said something wrong or offensive? What if she couldn't relate to them at all? The center was a large, multi-purpose building with concrete floors, fluorescent lighting, and posters about tribal history on the walls. A few teenagers were shooting pool in one corner, and several younger children were coloring at a long table. "Everyone," Jessica called out, "I want you to meet Sarah. She's going to be running our after-school programs for the next few months." The kids looked up with curious, measuring eyes. Sarah felt completely exposed, like they could see right through her nervousness to her inexperience and uncertainty. A girl who looked about 10 with long braids and bright eyes stood up from the coloring table. "Are you going to make us do homework?" she asked bluntly. Sarah laughed despite her nerves. "Well, I hope we can make homework a little more fun, but mostly I want to do projects and activities that you'll actually enjoy." "Like what?" asked a boy who looked about 12. Sarah took a deep breath. This was it, sink or swim time. "What kinds of things do you like to do? What are you interested in?" For the next hour she listened as the children told her about their interests, their dreams, their frustrations with school. She heard about kids who loved art but had no supplies, children fascinated by science but with no lab equipment, teenagers who wrote poetry but had nowhere to share it. By the end of that first day, Sarah felt exhausted but energized. These kids were exactly what Jessica had promised: smart, funny, and full of potential. They just needed someone to see that potential and help them develop it. As she walked home that evening, she passed a small house where a man was working in his garden. He looked up and nodded politely, and she waved back. She didn't know it yet, but that simple exchange would change everything. 3 weeks into her stay, Sarah had found her rhythm with the children. The after-school program had grown from 15 kids to nearly 30, and she'd managed to secure some basic art supplies and science kits through online fundraising. The kids responded to her genuine interest in their ideas and her willingness to learn about their culture alongside teaching them new skills. But it was during the 4th week that everything changed. She was leading a group of 8-year-olds in a nature art project behind the community center when she noticed a small boy watching from a distance. He appeared to be about 6 years old, with serious dark eyes and straight black hair that fell across his forehead. In his hands he clutched a small wooden bow, clearly handmade and carved with intricate designs. "Who's that?" Sarah asked Maria, one of her regular students who seemed to know everyone on the reservation. "That's Tommy," Maria whispered. "His mom died last year in a car accident. He lives with his dad now, but his dad is really sad all the time. Tommy doesn't talk much anymore." Sarah's heart immediately went out to the little boy. She'd worked with children dealing with loss before, and she recognized the particular stillness that came with grief. She waved at Tommy, but he just stared at her with those solemn eyes before turning and walking away. Over the next few days, Sarah noticed Tommy appearing at the edges of their activities. He never came close enough to participate, but he was always there, watching with quiet intensity while holding his little bow. She tried not to make a big deal of his presence, understanding that he needed to approach at his own pace. It was during a particularly successful science experiment involving baking soda volcanoes that she first heard his voice. The kids were squealing with delight as their volcanoes erupted, and even Tommy had crept close enough to see what was happening. When one of the volcanoes produced an especially impressive eruption, she heard a small laugh from behind her. She turned and saw Tommy quickly cover his mouth with his hand, as if he'd surprised himself by making noise. Their eyes met for just a moment before he darted away again, but Sarah felt like she'd won a small victory. That afternoon, she decided to learn more about Tommy's situation. Jessica was happy to fill her in, though her expression grew sad as she talked. Tommy's father is David Running Bear. He's a good man, works construction when he can find jobs, but he's been struggling since his wife died. Lisa was the light of their family, always laughing, always organizing community events. Her death hit everyone hard, but David and Tommy especially. Where does Tommy go when I'm running programs? Is someone watching him? David works odd hours, so Tommy spends a lot of time with his grandmother during the day. But after school, he mostly just wanders around. David doesn't want to burden anyone, so he doesn't ask for help. That evening, Sarah found herself taking a different route home, one that happened to pass by the house where she'd seen the man gardening on her first day. She realized now that it must be David's house. It was small but well-maintained, with a neat vegetable garden and children's toys in the yard. David was outside again, this time fixing what looked like a broken fence post. Tommy sat on the front steps, still holding his bow, watching his father work. The scene was peaceful but tinged with an indefinable sadness. As Sarah walked by, David looked up and nodded the same polite greeting he'd given her before. This time she stopped. "Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm working at the community center with the kids' programs." David straightened, wiping his hands on his jeans. He was tall and lean, probably in his early 30s, with kind eyes that held a depth of sadness she could almost feel from across the yard. "David Running Bear," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "I've heard good things about what you're doing with the children. Thank you. I've noticed Tommy watching our activities. He's welcome to join us anytime." David glanced at his son, and Sarah saw something complex pass across his face. Love, worry, and a kind of helplessness. "Tommy doesn't join group activities much anymore," he said carefully. "Not since his mother died." Sarah felt the weight of that simple statement. "I'm sorry for your loss. Maria mentioned that Tommy's mom was special to everyone here." She was. David's voice became even quieter. She was the one who organized things, who brought people together. "I'm not good at that kind of thing." Sarah looked at Tommy, who was listening to their conversation while pretending to examine his bow. Sometimes kids need time to find their way back to things they used to enjoy. There's no rush. Something in David's expression shifted, a small easing of tension around his eyes. "Thank you for understanding." Over the following days, Sarah began to see the family dynamic more clearly. David was clearly devoted to his son, but he moved through his days with the careful precision of someone barely holding things together. Tommy was equally devoted to his father, often following him around like a small shadow, but the natural exuberance of childhood seemed to have been put on pause. It was during a storytelling session about local legends that Tommy made his next small step forward. Sarah was telling a traditional story about a brave young warrior who used a magic bow to protect his people. As she spoke, she noticed Tommy had crept closer than usual, close enough that she could see the intricate carvings on his wooden bow. When she finished the story, most of the children ran off to play, but Tommy remained seated, staring at her with those serious eyes. "That's a beautiful bow," she said gently, settling down beside him on the grass. Tommy looked down at the bow in his hands, running his small fingers over the carved designs. "My papa made it for me," he said so quietly she had to lean in to hear him. "Your papa is very talented." "These carvings are amazing," Tommy nodded solemnly. He said Mama would have liked it. She liked beautiful things. Sarah's throat tightened at the simple statement. "I'm sure she would have loved it. And I'm sure she'd be proud of how well you take care of it." Tommy looked up at her then, really looked at her as if seeing her clearly for the first time. "Do you have a mama?" "I do. She lives far away, but I talk to her on the phone." "I can't talk to my mama anymore," Tommy said matter-of-factly, "but sometimes I pretend she can hear me when I'm holding my bow." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, but she kept her voice steady. "I think that's a wonderful way to stay close to her." They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, watching the other children play. Then Tommy stood up, clutching his bow, and walked away without another word. But something had shifted. Sarah could feel it. That evening she found herself thinking about David and Tommy long after the sun had set. She'd come to the reservation to help children learn and grow, but she was beginning to understand that healing came in many forms, and sometimes the teacher had as much to learn as the students. The breakthrough came on a Thursday afternoon in early October. Sarah had organized an outdoor archery lesson, borrowing real bows and arrows from the tribal recreation department. She'd thought it might interest some of the older kids, but she hadn't expected Tommy to show up. Yet there he was, standing at the very back of the group, still clutching his wooden bow but watching with obvious fascination as she demonstrated proper stance and technique. Sarah tried not to make a big deal of his presence, but her heart raced with excitement at this sign of engagement. "Who wants to try first?" she asked the group of 12 kids ranging from ages 8 to 15. Hands shot up immediately, but Tommy just stood quietly in the back. Sarah worked with each child individually, helping them learn to hold the bow, draw the string, and aim at the hay bales they'd set up as targets. The kids were having a wonderful time, laughing and cheering each other on. It was Maria who noticed Tommy first. "Miss Sarah," she called out, "Tommy has a bow too. It's really pretty." All eyes turned to Tommy, who looked suddenly panicked at being the center of attention. Sarah saw him take a step backward, ready to flee. "Tommy," she said gently, "would you like to show us your bow? You don't have to shoot if you don't want to, but I'd love to see the carvings your papa made." Tommy hesitated, looking around at all the faces watching him. Sarah held her breath, knowing this could go either way. Then slowly he walked forward and held out his wooden bow. "Wow," breathed Jake, one of the older boys. "Look at these designs. Your dad is really good at carving." Tommy's face lit up with pride. "He taught me some of the meanings. This one is for protection," he said, pointing to a small eagle carved near the grip. "And this one is for courage." Sarah knelt down to Tommy's level. "Those are perfect symbols for a bow. Would you like to try shooting one of the real bows? I could help you." Tommy looked uncertain, but after a moment he nodded. Sarah selected the smallest bow and showed him how to hold it safely. His small hands shook slightly as she positioned his fingers, but he listened carefully to every instruction. "Now remember, we're not trying to hit the bullseye on your first try," Sarah said. "We're just learning how it feels to draw and release." Tommy nodded solemnly, taking the stance she'd shown him. He drew the string back with obvious effort. The bow was still too big for him, and released. The arrow flew wild, landing several feet to the left of the target, but Tommy's face broke into the biggest smile Sarah had seen from him. "I did it," he said, his quiet voice full of wonder. "I really shot an arrow." The other kids cheered, and Tommy practically glowed with pride. He spent the rest of the session taking turns with the bow, getting better with each shot. More importantly, he began talking to the other children, sharing stories about his wooden bow and asking questions about their interests. When David came to pick up Tommy that evening, he stopped short at seeing his son animated and chatting with Maria about different types of arrowheads. Sarah walked over to him, unable to contain her smile. "He did really well today," she said. "Natural talent, just like his papa." David's eyebrows rose. "You know I made his bow?" Tommy told me. "He's very proud of it, and he should be. The craftsmanship is beautiful." David looked at his son, who was still deep in conversation with Maria. "I haven't seen him talk to other kids like that since—" He trailed off, but Sarah understood. "He's a special little boy. You should be proud." "I am," David said quietly. "Every day." As the weeks passed, Tommy became a regular at the after-school programs. He was still quiet compared to the other children, but he participated in activities, asked questions, and even began to smile more often. Sarah watched his transformation with deep satisfaction, feeling like she was finally making the kind of difference she'd hoped to make. But it wasn't just Tommy who was changing. Sarah found herself looking forward to the brief conversations she had with David when he picked up his son. He was incredibly intelligent and had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard. When she mentioned struggling to understand some of the cultural context for a project about traditional foods, he offered to help. "I could show you how to prepare some traditional dishes with the kids," he suggested one evening. "My grandmother taught me, and Lisa always said I was good at explaining things." Sarah jumped at the offer, and the following week David came to the community center to lead a cooking lesson. Watching him with the children, Sarah saw a different side of him emerge. He was patient, gentle, and had a natural ability to make learning fun. The kids responded to him immediately, and Tommy practically beamed with pride at seeing his father as the center of positive attention. "Your papa knows everything," Maria told Tommy as they worked together to grind corn for traditional mush. "He's the smartest person in the world." Tommy agreed seriously, making David duck his head with embarrassment and pleasure. After that, David began helping with the programs more regularly. He taught traditional crafts, shared tribal history, and helped with outdoor activities. Sarah found herself relying on his knowledge and appreciating his steady, thoughtful presence. One evening in late October, as they were cleaning up after a particularly messy art project, David surprised her. "Thank you," he said, his voice serious. "For what?" "For seeing Tommy, really seeing him. For giving him space to heal at his own pace. A lot of people just saw a sad, quiet kid and either tried to fix him immediately or gave up on him entirely." Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest. Tommy didn't need fixing. He just needed to remember that it was okay to be a kid again. David was quiet for a moment, organizing paintbrushes with careful precision. "Lisa always said that healing happens in its own time, that you can't force it. I'd forgotten that applies to children, too." "It applies to everyone," Sarah said gently. Their eyes met across the table, and Sarah felt something shift between them, a new understanding and connection that went beyond their shared concern for Tommy. The moment stretched until Tommy himself broke it, running up to show them a picture he'd painted of a family of eagles soaring over mountains. "Look, Papa, Miss Sarah taught us about perspective today. See how the mountains look far away?" David studied the painting seriously, giving it the careful attention he gave everything important to his son. "This is beautiful, Tommy. You're becoming quite an artist." As Sarah watched father and son examine the painting together, their dark heads bent close, she felt something she hadn't expected when she'd first arrived on the reservation. She felt like she was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do, and for the first time in years she wasn't thinking about what came next or what she was missing. She was simply, completely present in this moment, in this place, with these people who were becoming increasingly important to her. November brought the first real cold snap, and with it, a shift in the rhythm of life on the reservation. The after-school programs moved entirely indoors, and Sarah found herself spending more time planning activities that could work in the limited space of the community center. It was during this time that she began to truly understand how integrated she'd become in the daily life of the community. David had become her unofficial co-teacher, stopping by almost every day after his construction work ended. Their partnership had developed naturally. He understood the children's cultural background in ways she never could, while she brought fresh ideas and educational techniques that excited the kids. More than that, they worked well together, anticipating each other's needs and building on each other's strengths. Tommy had blossomed under the attention and structure of the programs. He still carried his wooden bow everywhere, but now he also participated actively in discussions, helped younger children with projects, and had even made friends with several other kids his age. Sarah often caught David watching his son with an expression of wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe the transformation. It was on a particularly cold Tuesday that everything changed. Again, Sarah was leading a group of kids in making holiday decorations, when Tommy approached her with unusual seriousness. He'd been quieter than usual that day, and she'd been wondering if something was wrong. "Miss Sarah," he said, tugging on her sleeve, "can I ask you something important?" Sarah knelt down to his eye level. "Of course, Tommy, what's on your mind?" Tommy glanced around the room, then leaned closer to her. "Do you like my papa?" The question caught Sarah completely off guard. She felt heat rise in her cheeks and hoped Tommy wouldn't notice her sudden nervousness. "Your papa is a wonderful man," she said carefully. "He's been a great help with our programs, and he's an excellent father." Tommy studied her face with the intensity that children brought to important questions. "But do you like him? Like how Mama used to like him?" Sarah's heart started beating faster. She realized this conversation was far more significant than she'd initially understood. "Tommy, why are you asking me this?" "Because Papa is sad a lot," Tommy said matter-of-factly. "He tries to hide it, but I can tell. And he smiles different when you're around. Like maybe he's not so sad." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. The wisdom and perception of this 6-year-old boy continually amazed her. But this observation hit particularly close to home, because she'd noticed the same thing about herself. She smiled differently, felt lighter, when David was around. "Your papa loved your mama very much," Sarah said gently. "That kind of love doesn't just go away." "I know," Tommy said. "But Mama told me once that love isn't like pie. It doesn't get smaller when you share it. It gets bigger." Sarah stared at him, wondering how this little boy had become so wise. "That's a beautiful thing for your mama to say." Tommy nodded, then looked around the room again before leaning even closer. "I think Mama would like you," he whispered. "You make people happy just like she did." Before Sarah could respond, Tommy scampered back to his art project, leaving her kneeling on the floor with tears in her eyes and a heart full of emotions she wasn't sure she was ready to examine. That evening, as David arrived to pick up Tommy, Sarah found herself studying his face more carefully than usual. She noticed the way his eyes crinkled when Tommy showed him his artwork, the gentle patience in his voice when he helped his son put on his jacket, the way he always thanked her for the day's activities with genuine gratitude. "Sarah," he said as they were gathering Tommy's things, "I wanted to ask you something." Her pulse quickened, wondering if somehow he'd overheard Tommy's earlier questions. "This weekend is our traditional Thanksgiving celebration here on the reservation. It's a community gathering with food, dancing, storytelling. I wondered if you'd like to come. As our guest," he added quickly, as if worried she might think it was an official obligation. "I'd love to come," Sarah said, surprised by how much she meant it. David's face lit up with a smile that transformed his entire expression. Tommy will be excited. He's been practicing a traditional dance with his uncle. As they prepared to leave, Tommy ran up to Sarah and hugged her legs tightly. "Miss Sarah," he said, looking up at her with sparkling eyes, "will you sit with me and Papa at the celebration?" "If your Papa doesn't mind, I'd be honored to sit with you both." David's eyes met hers over Tommy's head, and she saw warmth there that made her stomach flutter. "We'd both like that very much." The weekend celebration was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. The community center had been transformed with decorations, tables groaning under traditional foods, and a space cleared for dancing. Elders sat in places of honor, sharing stories and wisdom with younger generations. Children ran around playing games that had been passed down for centuries, while teenagers helped serve food and participated in the formal parts of the ceremony. Sarah sat between David and Tommy at one of the long tables, feeling simultaneously like an honored guest and a natural part of the community. David explained traditions and customs to her in quiet asides, while Tommy kept up a running commentary on everything happening around them. "That's my Uncle Robert," Tommy said, pointing to a man in traditional regalia preparing for a dance. "He's going to teach me the warrior dance when I'm older." "Your uncle is very graceful," Sarah observed, watching the man's fluid movements. "All the Running Bear men are good dancers," David said with a slight smile. "It's genetic." "Are you going to dance tonight?" Sarah asked. David shook his head. "I haven't danced at community celebrations since Lisa died. It didn't feel right." Sarah heard the sadness in his voice and understood. Grief had its own timeline, its own rules about what felt appropriate and when. The evening progressed with various performances, speeches, and shared meals. Sarah found herself drawn into conversations with community members, many of whom thanked her for her work with the children and made her feel genuinely welcome. Several elders shared stories with her about the old days, and she began to understand the deep connection between past and present that defined life on the reservation. It was near the end of the evening when Tommy surprised everyone. The formal dancing had concluded and people were beginning to clean up when Tommy suddenly stood up on his chair. "Excuse me," he called out in his clear voice. "I have something important to say." The room gradually quieted, and all eyes turned to the small boy standing on his chair with his wooden bow in his hands. "I want to thank Miss Sarah for coming to live with us," Tommy announced solemnly. "She taught me that it's okay to be happy again, even when you miss someone who went to the spirit world. And she makes my papa smile like he used to." Sarah felt her face flush red as murmurs of approval and knowing smiles rippled through the room. David looked mortified and proud simultaneously, but Tommy wasn't finished. "So I have a question for Miss Sarah," he continued, his 6-year-old voice carrying clearly through the now silent room. "Will you marry my papa?" The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah felt like every person in the room was staring at her, waiting for her response. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. David looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. "Tommy," David said quietly, "that's not how these things work." "But why not?" Tommy asked with the logic of childhood. "You like each other. I like Miss Sarah, she likes us. Mama always said that when people care about each other, they should be together." Sarah looked at Tommy's earnest face, then at David's mortified but hopeful expression, then at the roomful of people watching this drama unfold. In that moment, surrounded by this community that had welcomed her, looking at this man and his son, who had become so important to her, she realized something that took her completely by surprise. She didn't want to leave when her 6 months were up. She wanted to stay. She wanted to build something here with these people in this place that had become home in ways she'd never expected. But marriage? That was something else entirely, and definitely not a decision to be made in front of an entire community celebration. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Sarah smiled, feeling some of the tension ease. "Actually, I think Tommy's timing was perfect in its own way. He forced us to have a conversation we might have been avoiding for weeks." David looked up from his coffee mug, surprise evident in his eyes. "So you're not upset?" "Embarrassed?" "Yes, upset? No." Sarah took a deep breath, deciding to be as honest as Tommy had been. "The truth is, David, I have been thinking about staying past January. Not because of tonight, but because this place, this community, this work, it all feels like home in a way nowhere else ever has." David's expression shifted, hope replacing uncertainty. Really? Really? But Tommy's question tonight made me realize I need to be honest about something else too. Sarah felt her heart racing again, but she pushed forward. I have feelings for you, David. I didn't expect them, I didn't plan for them, but they're there. David was quiet for a long moment, and Sarah began to worry she'd misread everything. Then he reached across the table and covered her hand with his. I have feelings for you too, he said quietly. I've been fighting them because I didn't think it was fair to Lisa's memory or to you or to Tommy. But tonight, seeing you become part of our community, watching how you care for Tommy, how you've helped him heal. He paused, gathering his thoughts. Lisa always said that love multiplies, it doesn't divide. I think she would want Tommy and me to be happy. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. Tommy said something similar to me earlier this week. He said his mama told him love isn't like pie. It doesn't get smaller when you share it. David's smile was soft and sad and hopeful all at once. That sounds exactly like something Lisa would say. She was always wiser than the rest of us. They talked until late into the night, sharing their fears, their hopes, and their growing feelings for each other. David spoke about his grief, his struggles as a single father, and his amazement at watching Tommy come alive again under Sarah's influence. Sarah shared her own journey of feeling lost and directionless, her growing love for the community and the children, and her terror at the thought of leaving just when she'd found where she belonged. So what do we do now? Sarah asked as the night grew late. We take it slow, David said. We see how this feels day by day. We make sure Tommy is comfortable with any changes. And we don't let a 6-year-old's enthusiasm push us faster than we're ready to go. Sarah laughed. Even if his enthusiasm is pretty adorable? Especially then. Tommy has his mother's gift for getting what he wants by being irresistible. Over the following weeks, their relationship evolved gradually and naturally. David began staying for dinner after the after-school programs, and Sarah found herself joining David and Tommy for weekend activities. They went hiking in the mountains, visited David's extended family, and spent quiet evenings at home while Tommy played, and they talked about everything and nothing. The community watched their growing relationship with approval and gentle teasing. Elder Mary made pointed comments about young people needing to recognize good things when they saw them. Jessica, Sarah's supervisor, mentioned that the nonprofit would be happy to extend Sarah's position indefinitely if she was interested in staying. Tommy, for his part, was delighted with the development. He began referring to Sarah as almost mama, until David explained that relationships had proper progressions and that Sarah might always be special to their family without necessarily becoming Tommy's stepmother. Tommy listened seriously to this explanation, then asked if that meant he should call her Special Sarah instead. How about just Sarah? She suggested, ruffling his hair. I like the way you say my name. Christmas brought new traditions as Sarah experienced her first holiday celebration on the reservation. She helped organize a children's pageant, learned to make traditional holiday foods, and participated in the gift exchanges that brought the community together during the long winter nights. It was on Christmas Eve, as they sat around David's small Christmas tree watching Tommy play with his new toys, that Sarah realized she'd never been happier. The life she was building here wasn't anything she could have planned or imagined 6 months ago, but it felt absolutely right. Penny for your thoughts, David said softly, following her gaze to Tommy, who was showing his wooden bow to a new action figure. I'm thinking about how much can change in 6 months, Sarah said, and how sometimes the life you're meant to live finds you when you least expect it. David reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers. Are you happy, Sarah? Really happy? Happier than I've ever been, she said honestly. This feels like home, David. You and Tommy feel like family. That night, as Sarah walked back to her small house under a sky brilliant with stars, she thought about Tommy's question from the community celebration. She still wasn't ready to answer it. They all needed more time to be sure of their feelings and their future. But for the first time since arriving on the reservation, she wasn't thinking about what came next or where else she might go. She was simply grateful to be exactly where she was with people who had become her heart, could feel dozens of eyes watching her, waiting for her response to Tommy's innocent but earth-shaking question. Her mouth felt dry. Her heart was racing, and she had absolutely no idea what to say. It was Elder Mary Spotted Hawk who broke the tension. The elderly woman's laughter rang out across the room, warm and knowing. That boy has his grandfather's directness, she said, wiping tears from her eyes. Never one to beat around the bush, that family. The room erupted in laughter and good-natured comments, giving Sarah a moment to breathe and David a chance to gently lift Tommy down from his chair. Tommy, David said quietly, we need to talk about appropriate questions and timing. But Tommy wasn't deterred. He looked between Sarah and his father with the confidence of a child who believed he'd solved a simple problem. But you do like each other, right? I can tell. Sarah knelt down beside Tommy, acutely aware that the room had quieted again and people were still listening. Tommy, your papa and I are friends. Good friends. And friendship is very important and special. But friends can become more than friends, Tommy said with 6-year-old logic. Like Mama and Papa were friends first, and then they got married and had me. David looked at Sarah with an expression that mixed apology, embarrassment, and something else. Something that looked like hope. I'm sorry, Sarah, we can talk about this later. Miss Sarah, Tommy continued, oblivious to the adult undercurrents swirling around him. If you married Papa, you could stay here forever. You wouldn't have to leave in January. Sarah's breath caught. In all the gradual changes and growing connections of the past months, she'd somehow managed to avoid thinking about the approaching end of her commitment. January felt both impossibly far away and terrifyingly close. Elder Mary approached them, her weathered hands gentle as she placed one on Sarah's shoulder and one on David's. Perhaps, she said with twinkling eyes, this conversation would be better continued in private. Tommy has raised important questions, but some discussions need quiet spaces. The celebration gradually returned to its normal rhythm, but Sarah felt like everything had shifted. People were kind and tactful, but she caught knowing looks and gentle smiles throughout the rest of the evening. When families began gathering their children and heading home, David approached her with obvious nervousness. Would you like to come over for coffee? He asked. Tommy should probably talk about what happened tonight, and you and I should probably talk too. Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. The three of them walked to David's house in comfortable silence, Tommy skipping ahead while David and Sarah followed, both lost in their own thoughts. David's house was warm and welcoming inside, decorated with Lisa's artistic touches and filled with the comfortable clutter of a home where a child was loved and cherished. Tommy immediately claimed Sarah's attention, showing her his room, his toys, and a photo album full of pictures of his mother. This is Mama, he said, pointing to a photograph of a beautiful woman with kind eyes and a radiant smile. Isn't she pretty? She's beautiful, Sarah said honestly. And you look just like her. Papa says I have her smile, but his stubbornness, Tommy said matter-of-factly. While Tommy continued his tour, Sarah studied the photographs of Lisa scattered throughout the house. She saw a woman who had clearly been the heart of her family, laughing at community events, gardening with Tommy, dancing with David at what looked like their wedding. Sarah felt a complex mixture of admiration for Lisa's obvious warmth and spirit, and something that might have been sadness for the life that had been cut too short. After Tommy had been tucked into bed with promises that they would talk more about appropriate questions in the morning, Sarah and David sat at his kitchen table with steaming mugs of coffee. The silence between them was charged with unspoken words and unexplored possibilities. I need to apologize, David began. Tommy shouldn't have put you on the spot like that. I've been trying to teach him about boundaries, but apparently 6-year-olds have their own ideas about social situations. Sarah. Spring arrived early that year, bringing with it a sense of renewal and possibility that seemed to touch everything on the reservation. Sarah had officially extended her position with the nonprofit, and her programs had expanded to include adult education classes and community development projects. She'd found her calling in ways she never could have imagined when she'd first loaded her car in Portland. Her relationship with David had deepened over the winter months. They'd taken things slowly as promised, building a foundation of friendship and trust that felt solid and real. Tommy had adjusted beautifully to having Sarah as a regular part of their lives, though he still occasionally asked pointed questions about when they might make it official. It was during the first warm week of March that David surprised her with a request that caught her completely off guard. I want to show you something, he said after one of their regular evening walks. But it means a lot to me, so I need you to understand that before you see it. Curious and slightly nervous, Sarah followed him to his truck. They drove for about 15 minutes into the hills above the reservation, finally stopping at a spot that overlooked the entire valley. David led her to a small clearing where someone had obviously spent considerable time and care, creating a peaceful space. There was a simple wooden bench, positioned to take advantage of the view, and around it, someone had planted native wildflowers and arranged smooth stones in pleasing patterns. A small wind chime hung from a nearby tree, creating gentle music in the evening breeze. "This is beautiful," Sarah said, genuinely moved by the serene beauty of the spot. "Who created this?" "I did," David said quietly. "After Lisa died. I needed somewhere to come and talk to her, somewhere peaceful where I could think and remember without feeling overwhelmed by sadness." Sarah felt her throat tighten with emotion. David was sharing something deeply personal, something sacred to his process of grieving and healing. "I used to come here almost every day," he continued, settling onto the bench and patting the space beside him, especially in the first few months after the accident. "Tommy was so lost, and I felt like I was failing him. Failing Lisa's memory, failing everyone." Sarah sat beside him, not speaking, understanding that this was a moment for listening. "I haven't been here in weeks," David said, looking out over the valley where lights were beginning to twinkle in houses below. "Not because I've forgotten Lisa or because I love her less, but because I don't need to come here to feel close to her anymore. She's part of me, part of Tommy, part of everything good we've built together." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching the sun set behind the mountains and paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "Why did you bring me here?" Sarah asked gently. David turned to face her, his expression serious but peaceful. "Because I wanted you to understand that you're not replacing Lisa in my life or Tommy's life. What we had with her was beautiful and complete, and what we're building with you is different but equally beautiful and complete. You're not Lisa's substitute. You're Sarah, and we love you for exactly who you are." Sarah felt tears slip down her cheeks. "I've been worried about that," she admitted, "wondering if I could ever measure up to someone who was so obviously perfect for you both." "Lisa wasn't perfect," David said with a soft smile. "She was wonderful, but she was human. She burned dinner regularly. She sang off-key, and she had a terrible habit of leaving books open in 17 different places around the house. But she was perfect for us at that time in our lives." He reached for Sarah's hands, holding them gently in his own. "You're perfect for us now at this time in our lives. You brought Tommy back from a place I wasn't sure he could return from. You brought me back too. You've created something new and beautiful with us, not tried to recreate something that was." As if summoned by their conversation, they heard the sound of a vehicle approaching. David's truck appeared, driven somewhat erratically by Tommy, who was standing on the seat and barely tall enough to see over the steering wheel. David's brother Robert sat beside him, obviously supervising but letting Tommy do the actual driving. "Papa," Tommy called as he brought the truck to a somewhat abrupt stop. "Uncle Robert said you might be here. He taught me to drive." "I can see that," David said, trying to look stern but obviously fighting a smile. "And we'll discuss the appropriateness of 6-year-olds driving trucks later. Miss Sarah." Tommy scrambled out of the truck and ran to them. "Guess what? Grandma Running Bear said she wants to teach you to make fry bread. And Uncle Robert said he'll teach you traditional beading if you want to learn." Sarah felt overwhelmed by the continued acceptance and inclusion she received from David's family. "That sounds wonderful, Tommy." Tommy climbed onto the bench between them, chattering about his driving lesson and his plans for teaching Sarah various reservation skills. As he talked, Sarah caught David's eye over his son's head and saw love and contentment there that made her heart full. "Tommy," David said when his son paused for breath, "what would you think if Sarah became part of our family officially?" Tommy's eyes went wide. "You mean like married?" "Eventually, yes. If Sarah wants to." Tommy turned to Sarah with the serious expression he wore for important matters. "Do you want to marry my papa and be my almost mama for real?" Sarah looked at this little boy who had asked her the same question months ago in front of an entire community, and realized that her answer had been slowly forming ever since that night. "Yes," she said simply. "I would like that very much." Tommy let out a whoop of joy that echoed across the valley, then threw himself into Sarah's arms for a hug that nearly knocked her off the bench. "When?" he demanded. "Can we have the wedding here? Can I wear my best clothes? Can I help plan it?" "Slow down, buddy," David laughed. "We just got engaged. Wedding planning comes next." "Actually," Sarah said, surprising herself, "I think having the wedding here would be perfect. This place represents healing and new beginnings. I can't think of anywhere more appropriate. David's smile was brilliant. Lisa would love that idea. She always said the most important ceremonies should happen in places that mean something to the people involved. Uncle Robert approached them with a knowing grin. So did someone finally make an honest woman out of my brother? Other way around, Sarah laughed. He made an honest woman out of me. As they sat together on the bench, David, Sarah, and Tommy between them, with Uncle Robert leaning against the truck and making jokes, Sarah felt a profound sense of completeness. The path that had brought her here had been winding and uncertain, full of rejections and disappointments that had seemed devastating at the time. But sitting here now, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky, surrounded by the family she'd found and the community that had embraced her, she understood that every disappointment had been leading her toward this moment, this place, these people. Tommy had fallen asleep against her shoulder, tired out by the excitement of driving and engagement announcements. David's arm was around both of them, and Uncle Robert was telling stories about David's childhood that made them all laugh quietly so as not to wake Tommy. "Are you happy?" David whispered to her as the evening grew late. Sarah looked down at Tommy's peaceful face, then at David's eyes that held all the love and promise of their future together, then out at the valley below where their life was taking root. "I'm more than happy," she said. "I'm home." 6 months later, they were married in the small clearing overlooking the valley, surrounded by the entire community, and officiated by Elder Mary Spotted Hawk. Tommy served as ring bearer, carrying the rings in a small pouch attached to his beloved wooden bow. Sarah wore a dress that incorporated traditional Modoc designs, made for her by David's grandmother as a wedding gift. As they exchanged vows, Sarah thought about the question Tommy had asked her that night at the community celebration. At the time, it had seemed impossibly premature and overwhelming. Now, she understood that sometimes the most important questions come from the most unexpected sources, and sometimes a 6-year-old's wisdom can change everything. When the ceremony was complete and they were pronounced husband and wife, Tommy stepped forward with his bow held high. "Now we're a real family," he announced to the gathered crowd, "and Miss Sarah is staying forever." The community erupted in cheers and laughter, and Sarah knew that Tommy was absolutely right. She was home and she was staying forever, and she had never been more certain of anything in her life.